I'd now like to introduce Nick Holom, economist with the Montana Department of Labor and Industry.
Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Holom. I'm an economist in the Research and Analysis Bureau for Workforce Services Division at Montana Department of Labor and Industry. So bear with me for a moment while I share my screen. 1 second. Oops. I've been with Montana Department of Labor and Industry for about 2 years, and I work trying to create better data resources for Montanans to understand their local economies. So this is going to be focused on understanding different trends in Montana's labor market and other labor market information that we present on our website, as well as some of the tools that are available to you. I'm always interested in hearing what sorts of strategies are working in recruiting for businesses and what sorts of difficulties you're having. But I wanted to start out just first by talking about the labor shortage in our state and what's driving it. So I've selected Custer, Dawson, Richland, and Roosevelt counties here. And these are population estimates across time. So we can see that population in these areas has been declining, but had a sort of increase around the Bakken boom and has since declined with the exiting of that economic activity. But when we look by age group, when we look at those who are in their working years, 15 to 54, prime working years, we see that a lot of that decline is coming from that population. So fewer or a smaller share of the population is in their working years. This is true across Montana, that we have growth in the share of the population that's in their retirement or near retirement years. And so what happens is there's just fewer, as those workers leave behind jobs, there's fewer people to pick up those jobs. And that is what's contributing to our increasing crunch in trying to find workers in that shortage. This chart, this data comes from the current population survey. It's a survey of approximately 1,500 to 2,000 Montanans every month. And so actually this top data, that's going to be, I'm not sure if you can see the chart back there, or the title, but those are people who are not in the labor force by their main reason for not being in the labor force. So we can see a lot of those people who are not in the labor force are retired. 60% are retired. We have an additional 13% who are attending school. That's a good thing for our economy long-term. That's going to increase their productivity, increase their skills, and increase their long-term earning potential. We have those who are caring for family. Childcare continues to be an issue across the state, and could potentially, if we increase the accessibility and affordability of childcare, that could draw more of those people into the labor force. We also have illness and disability. This is especially true as you get into older populations, that there's more illness and disability. So addressing those disabilities in the workplace, that's another group that could potentially be a source of labor in this time of labor shortage. Down below, we have the labor force participation rate. So one thing I want, if you walk away with nothing else from this presentation, just know that our labor force in total continues to increase. We continue to have more people employed or available for work, which is what the labor force is. It's either it's employment plus those who are unemployed and looking for work. So that continues to increase. But we use the labor force participation rate as a tool or a metric to understand the labor force in the context of population growth. So the labor force is increasing, the population is increasing, and the population is actually increasing faster than the labor force. So the labor force participation rate is the share of the population that's participating in the labor force. So we can see we've been on sort of a long-term, our long-term trend is a decline. We've had an additional decline from the pandemic, but we continue to climb back a little bit. And this tool, this is available on our job tracking dashboard under the Finding Workers tab. But you can select by age group to see how that share of those who are not in the labor force changes by age group. So 77% of those who are under 24 are attending school. Again, a good thing for our economy. Others are performing important tasks for society, such as caring for family. Others have an illness or disability. And then we have this other group. Other is actually one that we can't see. It's a write-in response on the survey that's suppressed. But I think that likely includes a lot of different barriers, such as resource constraints, so not having access to transportation, potentially not having enough money for the resources to obtain a job. And so that is what could be included in that group. Looking down below, we have the labor force participation rate for those who are under 24. So just prior to the pandemic, 60.8% of those under 24 are participating in the labor force. And that took a dip. A lot of these younger people are working in jobs that were more affected by the pandemic. We had a lot of food service jobs, job losses and layoffs, a lot of jobs in just leisure and hospitality, which would include concert venues, hotels. And because of that, they were laid off at a higher rate. They took a little bit longer to climb back, and now they're at 60.4%, which is close. This is a small sample size, so that that's likely not statistically different from that prior estimate, but basically 60% of those people under 24 are participating in the labor force. When you look at those 25 to 54, those who are not participating in the labor force are primarily caring for family, with 44% caring for family. 30% have an illness or disability that keeps them out of the labor force. Another 9% retired early, and another 7% are continuing to invest in themselves. But when you look down at this line here, we can see that nearly 86% of this population is participating in the labor force. So most of those people in their prime working years are working, and those who aren't are performing important tasks. They're working too. For my mom was a stay-at-home mom. That was a lot of work. So caring for family, while it's unpaid work, is work. And so most of those people are working or performing important tasks for society. Getting into these older age groups, 55 to 64, you have a larger share of those not in the labor force who have retired early, with 56%. Another 30% have an illness or disability. So actually, you'll see we can only apply one of these reasons to that group, but there's actually more people with disabilities in those older age groups. So again, potentially addressing those disabilities in the workplace. I think even work from home is a good solution for some of those people to maintain employment, continue to contribute in the labor force, and participate in the labor force while working from home. And then those 65 and up, we see this is much lower. And this is the age group in the population that's growing over this period. So we can see that 21 or nearly 22% of those 65 and up participate in the labor force. 94% of them are retired. So looking at those groups, those are going to be the main ones. We're focusing on trying to find ways to get back into the labor force, as the number of people who are unemployed and looking for work in total just continues to be at historic lows. And this chart just continues to drive that point home. When you look at all of these lines, this is again those who are not in the labor force by their main reason for not being in the labor force. That retirement group of people who are retired continues to climb from the 90s to the 2000s. And we see that it's increased by about 50,000 more people retired from 2010 to our present day. So that is what's driving the labor shortage, those people leaving behind jobs. When we see all these other reasons, they're relatively flat during this time period. There are very few people, very little change in the amount of people who are staying out of the labor force because of these other issues. And so we can try to think about ways to engage more of these people in the labor force. For any one of these groups, I think flexible work, part-time work, telework could provide better work-life balance to balance the responsibilities outside the home with a work life. For students, they may benefit from work opportunities such as job shadowing and internships that would augment their studies and maybe on-the-job training. It's a good thing that they're investing in their human capital. We're getting that education makes workers more productive long-term and likely, like I said, increases their long-term earning potential. But potentially there's ways we could draw more of those workers into the labor force. Illness or disability keeps about 41,000 Montanans out of the labor force, and likely even more as some of those who are retired, probably retired because of their disability. So finding ways to accommodate disability in the workplace, again, telework, if commuting to a workplace is especially arduous for this group, could be another way. And then other category, like I said, that likely includes background issues, criminal history, mental health issues, lack of transportation, simply lack of skills and resources to get a job. So there's a lot of services that our job service offices offer to try to combat these barriers, such as gas cards, potentially funding for a new pair of boots to get people the resources they need to get the job that's available to them. But I think even just thinking on a broader scale, thinking about even community health, better access to mental health resources. Again, that's hard to increase that when you're already dealing with a labor shortage, but finding ways, I think, using labor saving technology or finding other ways to get more out of our labor could be another thing to address that. Looking at those who are caring for family, we have elder care. As more of the population reaches retirement age, this could become more of an issue, put additional strain on the group of workers that are in their prime working years as they care for aging parents. But that's, again, a beneficial task for society. So being able to balance those non-work responsibilities with working is sort of the idea of trying to engage those caring for family. Under the child care part of that, according to analysis done by my colleague, Amy Watson, licensed child care capacity meets only 47% of estimated demand across the state. We also conducted a survey of businesses in the first quarter of 2020, and over half of the businesses in every region of the state reported lack of affordable childcare as a workforce issue. So in order to draw more of those parents into the labor force, that means potentially expanding affordable childcare. And that would also contribute to increasing the consistency of those workers being able to work the hours that they're able to work. I know my sister, she has a sort of hybrid schedule, has a young kid, is a single parent, and having that hybrid schedule allows her to deal with issues such as her daycare shutting down. She can work part-time from home and still get her hours in. So just to harp on the childcare issue a little more, this shows in the orange line the average hours in the previous week worked by parents versus non-parents. So on average, parents prior to the pandemic were working over 40 hours a week or just over. When we see where they're at now, they're at about 39 and have not recovered as of the most recent data. This is from the current population survey as well, and looks at a 12-month moving average. So that's the average hours worked in the previous week for those who were surveyed over the previous 12 months. So that continues to stay lower, whereas we see for non-parents, they work fewer average hours per week, and that's because those would include people on the ends of the age spectrum. So they just do more part-time work in general, but their hours have since recovered to their previous level of 37. So when we look at this dip, it doesn't seem like much, but that's an additional 3,600 more full-time employees if parents were working at their previous level. Increasing labor supply through the hours people are able to work could be another solution that childcare access provides. So pivoting now to the labor force, like I said, in Montana, across this, taking the state as a whole, we have more Montanans working and available for work than ever before. And that's really just another way of saying the labor force is increasing in Montana because it includes those who are employed and unemployed and looking for work. But there's a lot of geographic difference between where the labor force is growing and where it's shrinking. So this shows the labor force by county. Data for December of last year, that's the most recent data, compared to December of 2019. So whether if a county had an increase in their labor force over that period, they're going to be in the blue. And if a county had a decrease, they're going to be in the orange. So we can see for some of our counties here, we have Custer, where my grandparents live. They had an increase in their labor force of about 20, very little change. We see Dawson has had a decrease of 170, 96 fewer people in Richland in the labor force, and a decrease of 228 in Roosevelt County. So some of those counties having a decrease in the labor force, that goes back to what we saw in the population graphs with those counties having a decrease in the populations in their working years. We can see what that looks like over time with the Bakken boom. You can see, especially with Richland, that giant bump in the labor force as that was booming, and with the drop in oil prices, saw a decline into 2016 where it sort of leveled off but continues to decrease. For Custer, there may even be a slight increase over the years, though it's relatively flat, and for Dawson and Roosevelt, potentially slight decrease, though also relatively flat at about 45, close to 45,000. Looking now at employment and employment growth, this is similar to that labor force chart. We have employment in 2021, December of 2021 compared to December of 2019 prior to the pandemic. And we can see for some of these areas, such as Custer, we had greater growth in employment than we had in the labor force. So just switching quickly back to that labor force, we grew by 20 for the labor force, but our employment grew by 105. So what does that mean? There's just fewer unemployed people in that labor force. And that's what the unemployment rate is the share of the labor force that's not already job attached. So that's why employers are having such a difficult time finding workers. They're having to compete them away from other employers, as most of the people in the labor force are already employed, and there's very few who are not job attached. And looking at the unemployment level by county, this is the other part of our labor force. This is for December of 2021 as well, compared to 2019. We can see for every single county in Montana, we had a decrease in the level of unemployment compared to the pre-pandemic year. So very few people who are unemployed, looking for work, and not already job attached. So across time, this shows the unemployment rate. This is going to be it's not seasonally adjusted. The one you see reported, officially reported for the state, that's a seasonally adjusted. So it's trying to assess whether there's a true, taking into account the seasonal changes, whether there's a true change in the level of or the share of the labor force that's unemployed. But these are reported on a county level, not seasonally adjusted. And what we see is for every single one of the counties in this group, the main takeaway is looking back across time, you can see that their unemployment rates are either tied their lowest unemployment rate or are below, meaning there's just a very small share of that labor force that's not job attached. So this data actually comes from the quarterly census of employment and wages, and shows quarterly employment in industries at the county level. So these are the main sort of sectors or super sectors that we've chosen to focus on. But really I would just wanted to show this to show the breakdown of what industry employment looks like in local areas. So for Roosevelt County, we can see this top group, that's trade, transportation, and utilities. That's going to include things like retail trade, wholesale trade. Transportation would include transportation of passengers, but also cargo, and then utilities is of course utilities. And so we see that even with the spillover economic effects from the Bakken boom declined after that boom and has sort of leveled out there. We can also see education and health services. That's going to be the blue line here. That has continued to slightly decline as you have population outflows in that area, just requiring fewer services. And then you have leisure and hospitality. That's another one that's going to be connected to a lot of the other economic activity in the area. So leisure and hospitality would include that food service, would also include hotels, concert venues, bars, any things of that nature. So we see that those are the top three sort of employing sectors. Everything else is down there at the bottom. I should note that this includes just payroll employment, so it doesn't include the self-employed. For construction, there's probably a lot of employment that is self-employed, but that's a relatively low level, 72 in the county. We can look at natural resources and mining. That has stayed relatively level in Roosevelt. Switching over to Richland County, we can see that actually has declined quite a bit, but a similar breakdown in the other industries. We can look at trade and transportation. That's about 1,200 payroll employment, 700 in education and health services. And similar stories in Dawson and Custer County. The main employers are trade and transportation and utilities, while we have the second highest employer in these areas are education and health services and leisure and hospitality. So with a labor shortage, there's increased competition for workers, and that drives up wages as employers compete over that limited labor. We can see Richland County is there at the top with the highest average wage across these years. This is again payroll wages coming from the quarterly census of employment and wages, but we see wage increases in general over the last few years for a lot of these counties as employers compete over that limited resource. Across the state, looking statewide, payroll wages have outstripped inflation, so they're increasing at a faster rate, which is a good thing. That improves the economic well-being of Montanans. So now switching over to, this is a survey we've done of the main challenges for workers. Shows survey results from a survey conducted of job service employees and their viewpoints on the biggest challenges for the workers they work with. It's a relatively small sample size of about 100 job service workers surveyed. Some of these may be less pertinent to the eastern part of the state. I know affordability of housing. I lived in Bozeman. That was a big one there. But it could potentially be less of a significant issue in the eastern part of the state. But I think all of these are, good points of discussion for things that are barriers that people face in participating in the labor force. So, number one, we actually had 85% say that affordability of housing is a significant or extreme challenge. Daycare is second to that with 76%. Like I said, that's something that's true across every region of Montana. And we can see low pay is the third factor, which contributes to the affordability of those first two options. So potentially increasing pay, we already see businesses doing that. And sometimes that's not an option as a business. So potentially there's some other ways that you can compete for workers. We look at other barriers, lack of soft job qualifications. That's going to potentially involve training those workers, or potentially taking workers that you may not have accepted before because there were other options, but potentially there's someone who shows promise but doesn't have the job qualifications, and with a little bit of training could fill that position. Background issues, that's going to include criminal history and substance abuse. This one's a little harder, probably differs for different occupations. For some employers, such as in the construction industry, safety is a priority in the workplace. So having someone who has a substance use issue may just be a non-starter. But for people who have prior criminal histories, for those with prior substance abuse issues, changing the perception on that and changing the perception on who we hire could be another thing that would, one thing to think about when deciding who we're going to hire, especially when their background issues have no bearing on their ability to do the job. Lack of employer response was also an interesting one, because from employers, we're hearing, they're having a hard time finding workers. From some workers, we're hearing that employers aren't getting back to them. And so that could just truly be due to lack of qualifications on the part of the worker. Maybe they're applying for jobs that they're unqualified for. But one suggestion that came from a coworker is potentially people are getting weeded out because of a job qualification, such as having a bachelor's degree, even though they're perfectly capable of doing the job. So potentially, as an employer, rethinking those requirements, the way that you write the job description, the things that you require. Potentially you're requiring 5 years of work experience, and a person only has 4, so they choose not to apply. That could be another thing to rethink from an employer perspective. Someone also mentioned they were doing consulting for a business looking at their application process, and they found that the application process was especially arduous. So finding ways to sort of streamline that application process. People don't, especially when you're competing workers away from other employers or trying to compete workers from other areas outside of the state, people don't have half a day to complete and submit an application. They're working. So I think finding ways to streamline the application process, make it easier for people to get in the door, and then deciding whether they're a good candidate or not. Potentially accepting the fact that it's just you may need to take someone who doesn't have all the skills that you need yet, but shows promise and with a little bit of training can fill that position. Access to technology, we have 39% reporting that as a significant or extreme challenge. As more applications move online, that could be a bigger barrier for some folks who want to work but don't have access to technology. So our job service offices work to try to provide that access to technology to submit those applications for people. Age bias, though this is a less significant challenge compared to the others, if we have a lot of older workers who want to work but are getting passed over because of their age, potentially there needs to be more of an impetus to hire and keep older workers. Thinking back to those who are retired, finding ways to provide work that they want to do. Potentially they don't want to work full-time in their retirement, but would be willing to work part-time or a flexible work schedule. Those could be things to think about. And then lack of transportation. Our job service offices offer some opportunities to address this issue, such as gas cards, but there may be even thinking bigger picture about this, potentially thinking about public transportation, or potentially providing a company vehicle or perhaps a transportation stipend. I think even telework is a solution for this. If people don't have to commute to a workplace and drive every day, that becomes less of an issue. So who faces the most persistent barriers? This question restricted our job service workers to choose only 2 broad groups. We see that 47% chose older workers as being those that face the most persistent barriers. I think this could mean addressing perceptions about those workers, addressing barriers that may be with technology. I know, I grew up with technology, so a lot of that stuff is easy for me. But thinking about the ways that even getting those people in the door, or the training that could happen to help them with technology barriers, providing more flexible work arrangements. Perhaps they want to work to supplement retirement, but don't want to work a full-time job. Those with disabilities, like I said, there's overlap between older workers and disabilities, helping those workers to accommodate disabilities, potentially allowing for telework or a hybrid schedule, so they're not having to commute to an office every day, as that could be a challenge for a worker with a disability. Those with less education, goes back to closing the skills gap, training workers, potentially hiring workers that may need a little bit of investment on the employer's part. Single parents, that's another one, just thinking about that childcare, increasing access to childcare, increasing the flexibility of the hours that parents are able to work so that they can pick up kids from school or have a hybrid work environment to balance those things. and potentially to pay to support, provide additional support for childcare. 15% said Native Americans face the most significant barriers. That's one thing we see a lot of higher unemployment rates on reservations than in surrounding areas. So increasing economic opportunity for Native Americans, I think even work from home could be a way to provide economic opportunities in places we haven't before, and potentially bring that job to the worker instead of the worker to the job. And what's most important for workers? Better pay, which is a no-brainer, and we already see a lot of businesses increasing pay to compete over those workers. Of course, people always like better pay. I would love to get paid more, but that's not always an option from an employer's perspective. So thinking about these other top reasons, potentially these are things you might think about changing: flexible work hours, ability to telework, work located close to home. All of those speak to the work-life balance that people are looking for as they balance home responsibilities with a job. And so now I want to quickly take a brief look at some of the different tools we provide on our website here. So first, just starting off of our main page here, you'll see this giant banner. This is actually something you can subscribe to. It's called Economy at a Glance. And so this is an article I wrote, Can I Get a Side of Workers? It's looking at the labor shortage and the food service industry and how that may be affecting the food service industry more than other industries. And then we go down, we actually provide a lot of statistics on the labor force, timely statistics to look at your local area and see what your labor force, what's happening with your labor force, what your unemployment rate is, and put your local area into context with the rest of Montana. And then a lot of the charts that I showed in this presentation come from our job tracking dashboard. So first we have this labor force growth tab. And sorry that if this is not super visible on your guys' end, but I'm just going to quickly demonstrate how this works. Oops. Okay, so we go to county comparison. Again, we have those labor force estimates by county. You can actually select your county, and that will change this chart over here. And we have that labor force indexed to the pre-recession year. So what that means is if you're at 100%, you're at the same level you were in the previous year. If you're below, you are at 90. I think Richland is at 98.4% of their pre-recession labor force for that month. We have a similar tool for employment growth. And then looking at our unemployment insurance data, this is data that we update weekly. I just updated it this morning. This looks at all unemployment insurance claims, the number of people who filed unemployment insurance across Montana. So we can see that we're actually currently at a lower level of even claimants than we have been in prior years, just prior to the pandemic. In February, we had about 11,100. Versus right now in February, we have even fewer unemployment claimants. So more evidence showing that there's just very few people who are not already employed and looking for a job. We again provide this data at the county level. Takes a little bit to load, but you can see, you can click on your county, all unemployment insurance claims, the number of people, and see what that looks like in your local area. And then we also provide data on our job postings on our montanaworks.gov job postings webpage. So we can see that, again, more evidence of the shortage, increasing number of job openings available in Montana across time. But what I really like about these charts is you can also select for your local area and see the top 20 occupations with postings on montanaworks.gov. So we can see in Custer County, we have farm workers, farm workers is the top occupation in terms of total openings in the area. You can actually even click on this and that will change this chart to show for that occupation where other jobs are, but it'll also show the typical hourly occupational pay for that occupation. So you can decide using that, maybe I need to increase wages because I'm not paying even the median wage for that job, and increase wages to be competitive. And then some of those charts that I showed earlier on the labor force and reasons people stay out of the labor force. That's going to be in this "Where are the workers finding workers" tab. And so we have a variety of different information here. Again, the labor force participation rate, the share of those who are not looking for work by their main activity. But we also provide different tabs here looking at those who are unemployed. So this allows you to select by each group and see that most of these people, most of those who were under 24 were employed in the last year and are temporarily unemployed. And then we can sort of see how that changes with each age group. But there's also looking at different genders. We can see how that breaks down for different groups. This is going to be similar to that, the very first slide, again, allowing you to select by different groups to see, okay, most of those who are men who are not in the labor force are retired, but you can also select by different demographic groups as well. So those are all tools we've created to try to help you understand your local economy. A few other things that you might, if you're just looking for quick stats on your local area, you can go to our local area profiles. Click on county. Oops. And you can click on your local area. I'm just going to leave it on Montana for now, but you'll get a brief blurb about the area, some of the main economic activities going on in that area. You'll get local you'll get labor force statistics. This comes from local area unemployment statistics or LAOS data. On the labor force, on unemployment and the current unemployment or the unemployment rate in the previous year. So we have 2020 here, that was quite high, but now it's at a historic low. And so that will be updated fairly soon with 2021 data once it's fully become available. You can also scroll down and look at your employment by industry. So we have the industry breakdown here, but we also have it in this little chart over here. It shows the total number of establishments. So those are work sites. So you can see that a lot of construction, there's more work locations, whereas for healthcare and social assistance, that's going to, on the y-axis, be have the highest average employment by industry across Montana. So. And then one other tool I wanted you to see, again, this is thinking more about whether you're paying a competitive wage. This data comes from the Occupational Employment Statistics, OEWS program. It's a data source that we collect panel data or survey data on a regular basis, and we update every year. So you can go through this document or this publication, and you can actually go down to specific occupation groups. You can click on that occupation group and say, I'm looking for a chiropractor. I can see the employment, but I can also see the average hourly rate, the median hourly rate. And you also have that data for different MSAs for different parts of the state. For some occupations, those are going to be suppressed, so you won't see them. But for certain occupations where there are a lot of them or enough of them for us to report these statistics, you can see, looking at the east central part of the state, that our pharmacists make roughly 115,930 on average, and a median wage of 119,000. So that's useful information. And then one last little dashboard I wanted to show really quickly is our job projections dashboard. This, we come out with new projections every year for how much we expect different occupations and industries to grow in Montana. This one is primarily focused, this dashboard, on occupational growth and helping people identify in-demand occupations. So again, with these dashboards, you can click on your region of the state and see which occupations are going to be most in demand in that part of the state based on job openings. So job openings is exactly what it sounds like, the annual number of job openings expected in that year. So cashiers, though there's very little job growth, there's not going to be a lot of new jobs in cashiers. The number of openings is high because there's a lot of churn in that occupation. It also tends to be a lower paying occupation at $24,000 on average per year. There are a few different filters as well that you can go through to look at if I just want to look at apprenticeable occupations in my region. What are the most in-demand apprenticeable occupations? We have heavy and tractor trailer truck drivers, bookkeeping and accountants, and construction laborers. Those are all apprenticeable occupations in Montana that are in high demand. So looking at whether we're training people for high wage jobs that are in demand, that's what we've sort of built this tool around. And so with that, I'd also like to just highlight myself as a resource. If you ever have any questions on different data that we present on our website, we have a lot of different tools for you to select that data and work with it yourself. But if you need someone to just sort of point you in the right direction to explain this data to you, I'm always happy to respond to any info requests. If we even get, just info requests on how much employment do we have in this industry in our part of the state. And so feel free to reach out to me and ask those questions, and I can even put together the data for you. So. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I see there's some, I don't know if there's questions in the chat, but.
I'm not seeing any questions right now. We can wait a few moments here to see if somebody has something they want to expand on. So,
Hey, Nick, you suggested that businesses maybe start working or giving the option of working remotely and or having flexible hours. Are you seeing that more and more businesses are making that transition, or are we still kind of at the beginning stages with that?
So I think nationwide, at least, that more businesses have been making that transition. Statewide with COVID, I think it was something that people were forced to do, and then they found out that it actually worked pretty well. But for some people, it's just having that face-to-face interaction. I think it is valuable, but at the same time, it's also valuable to be able to address those at-home responsibilities and balance those at-home responsibilities. So there is, costs and benefits, I guess, but I think statewide, I don't really have a good answer for whether people have continued to adopt those things to continue to increase work from home, but across the nation, that's been true.
Okay, thank you for that. Looks like there might be something else in the chat. I'm just checking.
I do have another question too. Any stats on how much of an impact the opioid epidemic has had on the labor force in Montana?
I don't have any stats on that, and that would be an interesting thing to look into. Like I said, I think a lot of those, when you look at that other group, that's probably the group that is going to include those types of issues. And so when we look at the trend in that hasn't actually increased over that time period. But again, that's a small sample. Potentially there's something that's being missed there. But definitely something that sticks in my mind as an issue that keeps people keeps people out of the labor force and prevents them from being able to work fully. So.